In 1972, two boys head out by themselves on a 3-day camping adventure. In the middle of the night, a relentless hunter invades their isolated camp and chases them into a world of extreme and life-altering terror. This hunter does not appear from the dark woods around them or the highway a few miles away, but comes straight down from the vast starry skies above. Hunted by UFOs, a survivor's tale, tonight on Ominous and Grim.
I'm Mr. Ominous.
And I'm Dr. Grim, covering shocking histories
and darkest mystery.
From the undeniable facts
to personal experience, our channel covers all things ominous
and grim. I'm Dr. Grim, and tonight's shocking history is an accurate recounting of an otherworldly encounter that occurred over 50 years ago. It has been shared by the remaining survivor of the two boys who lived through it, more or less intact, on condition of anonymity for both, and accuracy in sharing the two essential sides of the experience recounted. Both the terrifying horror that cannot be forgotten even after a half a century, and the mysterious gaps in memory that could never be recalled, even from the moment whatever was happening happened until the present day. Respecting those conditions, we now ask you, our audience, to assess your own personal preparedness to hear this story. If you may be triggered by experiences of overwhelming terror, of being hunted, captured, or even tortured by any source, whether extraterrestrial or earthly, well, you will have to choose whether to continue listening to tonight's story or to skip it and listen to one of our many other episodes instead. But for those with an insatiable curiosity to learn as much as they can about the incredible range of different UFO experiences that are possible, we invite you to go camping with Joey and Angelo, two avid 11-year-old Boy Scouts who are out of school for the summer. These two boys have no idea they are about to be tested for the hardest merit badge imaginable: to survive, evade, escape, and resist an unknowable alien enemy from beyond the stars. If you're a fan of shocking history and dark mystery, you've come to the right place. Find our next episode on your platform by following this podcast. Share it with a friend and give us a review. Join a community of avid listeners at ominousandgrim.com for bonus content and benefits. That's ominousandgrym.com. And now, back to our story. The June weather of the summer of 1972 spread over the Georgia Piedmont like a hot, sticky blanket. By July, the southern temperatures had only increased, making it hotter than ever. It was more than a month into the summer break from school. Riding bikes over the blistering hot asphalt with no particular place to go had lost its appeal to Joey and his best friend Angelo. They were bored with just sweating and getting sunburned. A mission was needed, so they looked around for something else to do for the upcoming weekend. "Let's go camping," Joey suggested. "Why not?" replied Angelo. "There's nothing else to do." The boys excitedly began to plan their trip. At 11 years old, both boys were keen and skilled campers who spent most of their time outdoors, young Boy Scouts who had camped on their own many times before. Across a rural highway, just off of the neighborhood of their two nearby houses, lay a long stretch of deep and undeveloped woods, easily reached by bicycle. It was a vast area, and their plan was to find some new area previously unexplored a few miles into those woods to set up their camp. Joey suggested they should leave Friday night and stay until Sunday afternoon. Angelo agreed, but thought they should stay longer and not come back until Monday morning in order to find a new place they had never seen before. "Dad won't let me borrow the tent for that long," Joey complained. "He's really fussy about that old tent." "Then we won't take the damn tent. We'll just use sleeping bags." "I'd rather have the tent. It keeps the blood-sucking mosquitoes out," Joey insisted. "Well, if we drag the tent along, we'll stay until Monday," Angelo demanded. "If we come back on Monday, we'll have to haul more food with us. That'll be hard to carry if we take the bikes," Joey countered. The boys worked out between them a common plan for 30 more minutes. Finally, they agreed to take the tent, the bikes, and the extra food. They would stay in their camp until Monday morning, and they set out for the destination on Friday afternoon. The boys rode their heavily laden bikes down the asphalt highway until they reached the edge of the woods. Once inside the woods, the undergrowth was pretty thick in places, so they shouldered their packs and gear and pushed their bikes along, hopping them over roots and obstacles where necessary. The sun beat down on the pine trees, and the woods were filled with the sharp, clean smell of pine resin. Cicadas sang in the undergrowth, and the twigs and pine straw crackled under their feet as they marched through it steadily. Panting with exertion and sweating heavily, they finally arrived at a small clearing in the thick forest after several hours of laborious hiking, wearing the packs and pushing the bikes. The clearing was quite unusual and very welcome, an entirely flat spot, covered in grass and open to the blue sky above. A dense wall of pine trees surrounded the whole, otherwise treeless circle, with long grasses underfoot. "Let's camp here," Joey said wearily. Angelo agreed. He was too exhausted. Even though the clearing in the middle of the woods gave him a weird feeling, he would have cause to remember this later and wonder why he didn't pay more attention to it at the time. The boys unstrapped the tightly rolled tent and the other supplies from their packs and bikes. They carefully set the tent up, unrolled their sleeping bags, and gathered stones to make a fire ring. When that was finished, they went into the pine trees to search for firewood, which was plentiful in the form of dead wood and fallen limbs. They searched and piled up enough kindling and logs to last at least through the night. They could always find more wood tomorrow for tomorrow's fire. Just before the sun started to set, the boys built a fire and roasted hot dogs and marshmallows. They opened the sodas Joey's mom had sent along with them. "Food tastes better when it's cooked over an open fire," Joey said. Angelo agreed. After eating, they lounged around on the ground, slapping at mosquitoes, telling stories and joking as the daytime sounds of the forest gave way to the sounds of evening. It was a fine night for camping. The sky was beautifully clear and the stars twinkled overhead. The moon rose slowly over the dark shadows of the pine trees, magnificent and full. It was a welcome sight that helped to quell Angelo's inexplicable anxiety. Somehow, he just couldn't shake the feeling that they should not be in that clearing. "What's wrong with you?" Joey asked. "Nothing," said Angelo. "You've been acting nervous all afternoon." "I'm okay," Angelo insisted. "Let's get some sleep." "You want to leave the fire burning?" "We better put it out," Angelo said. "It's burning low anyway." They put out the fire, lit a small lantern, and shook out their sleeping bags. "What time is it?" asked Joey. He'd forgotten his wristwatch. 11:15, answered Angelo. The boys went inside of the tent and adjusted the mesh flap to keep out the mosquitoes, at least the ones that didn't follow them inside. The steamy night air felt too hot for a heavy sleeping bag, so they lay down on top of them like mattresses. They put out the lantern and talked in the warm darkness. Crickets sang sleepily in the long grass just outside their tent. The wind blew softly and owls hooted in the whispering pines. It wasn't long until sheer exhaustion took over and both boys dozed off. The next thing Angelo knew, the tent was filled with a bright red light. Was he dreaming? He blinked hard, but the light didn't go away, but instead grew in intensity. And there was a crackling, buzzing sound that came from everywhere at once. A very loud buzzing, high-pitched like a scream and pounding at the same time. And more than just light and sound, there was an overpowering, burning chemical odor which grew more and more choking with every passing second. "Joey!" he shouted. Joey was slow to respond, so he reached over and shook him hard. "What?" Joey opened his eyes. "Listen! Smell!" cried Angelo. Joey sat straight up. "What the hell's that red light? I think the woods are on fire!" he cried. "I don't know. It just woke me up." "We gotta see what it is," Angelo said. Both boys rolled and crouched to the front of the tent and quickly pushed the flap aside. A bright red light shone everywhere, illuminating the clearing and deep into the forest beyond as far as they could see. Yet there were no flames or heat, just a red light coming from everywhere at once. It looked surreal, like nothing they had ever seen before. The next thing Joey remembered is hearing Angelo scream beside him while hearing his own scream as well. Both boys realized they were no longer standing in the clearing, but running full tilt through the branches and underbrush of the forest, so far away from the clearing that it could no longer even be seen. And yet every step was illuminated by the same powerful, screeching, buzzing red light. Covered in minor whip wounds and tears from lacerating branches, both boys screamed and ran exactly as they had woken up, barefoot and with almost no protective clothing other than the denim cut-off shorts each had fallen asleep in. Between poking their heads out of the tent and suddenly finding themselves fleeing madly with hearts pounding in their throats, neither had put on their sneakers, grabbed their bikes, any of the food, packs, or camping equipment. They were simply running recklessly through the underbrush, under the red light from above, in a terror without a definite subject that blotted out every thought. They had no time to even register how odd it was, or think how had they gotten so far from the clearing so fast. Nor did they bother to talk to each other once finding themselves on the run, beyond the yells and grunts of pain and exertion as they ran, panic-driven, in the familiar direction of the highway, faster than they thought was even possible. The pain in their bare feet was excruciating as they sprinted across thick roots, pine straw, twig, and pine cone-covered forest floor, while twigs and branches whipped their legs, arms, chest, and faces like scourges in the red light all around them. Just as they neared the edge of the woods, Angelo tripped on either a root or a rock and flew forward headlong. The flaming red light that now illuminated the entire sky quickly accumulated, growing in intensity once again until half blinding him when he looked upward. Whatever it was chasing them and catching up fast. In an instant, and in a way neither he nor Joey could ever later decipher, Angelo was back on his feet and already at full speed again, tearing through the trees and thick undergrowth again alongside Joey. The boys came to a small creek, splashing through it noisily and quickly in a rush, throwing slimy mud all over their legs, chest, and the roughly cut-off denims they were wearing for summer. Sharp rocks pierced and bruised their feet, but they never stopped running. In other circumstances, the woodcraft training of the boys would have kicked in to look out for poisonous snakes fond of the water crossing, but there was no room for any such concern. Nothing mattered in that moment except to get away from that weird red light and its shrieking, buzzing sound and its noxious, burning, chemical smell. In a seeming flash, the boys had made it across the highway and into the relative safety of the neighborhood streets on the other side, with nothing but their shorts, wounds, and a lot of mud. Their faces, arms, and feet were all scratched and bruised from the briars and vines they had plowed through at top speed. Angelo's toes on one foot were blue and bloody where he tripped and fallen headlong. But none of that mattered now. Somehow, they had succeeded in getting out of the woods alive, across the highway, and back amongst the familiar streets and houses of the neighborhood. During the entire panic-stricken run, neither boy had spoken a single word with the other. Communication between them had moved to another level, simpler and deeper. Speech had been cast aside by survival's need. And yet, once back in the relative safety and society, Angelo and Joey could read in each other's dilated eyes and injured conditions that the time for speech and processing was still far away from the present moment. Without a word between them, the boys realized that they could not simply return home in their inexplicable condition, and instinctively both knew what action they would next take. They would hide. Helping each other to climb over the fence into Joey's backyard, they climbed into Joey's little sister's plastic playhouse and spent the rest of the night hiding in silence. There was no thought of waking their families to try and explain what they'd seen in the woods, when they could not even explain what exactly had happened to themselves. It was obvious that no one else could possibly believe them. Especially when taking into account the final weird sight they'd just seen, when they had reached the paved surface of the highway and its wider view of the full skies above, from one side of the horizon to the other. From just over the center of the deep pine woods, a huge red light glowed brightly in a dome-like shape. Both boys later assumed this was definitely a craft of some kind, in a dome form, now seen in perspective as casting the red light in a wide cone over a large portion of the forest. The assumed UFO and its down beam of light slowly floated away over the horizon on a very flat and deliberate plane of movement, until it eventually disappeared out of sight, heading away from their direction. Just as suddenly as it had overpowered them, it was gone, with nothing remaining of the encounter but two traumatized boys with the problem of how to explain to others what actually took place deep in the woods in the dead of Friday night or the small hours of Saturday. The next day, on Saturday, the boys tried to recuperate. Joey's baffled dad demanded to know where Joey had left his prized tent. Both boys' moms loudly questioned where had the boys left their shoes, for God's sake. Eventually, the boys conferred together in private to decide what to do about it. "We gotta go back and get our stuff," Joey said. "Yeah," agreed Angelo, "but is it safe?" "If I don't get that tent back, it won't be safe for me," exclaimed Joey. So on Sunday morning, the following day, in full daylight, the boys returned to the campsite. Everything was just as they had abandoned it, nothing missing or disturbed, except the long grass in the odd clearing was now pressed down and scorched into a huge circle shape. And a strange metallic aftersmell clung to everything, stinging their noses and making their eyes water over 36 hours after the initial encounter. The boys quickly gathered up everything and hurried away as they choked from that smelly, burned clearing in the thick pine woods. Back home, everything retrieved still stank with that obnoxious smell. Joey's dad, usually very mellow and tolerant, complained bitterly of this when he got his prized tent back. Both moms refused to let the boys bring their smelly clothes or shoes into the house. The parents even demanded that the boys throw their sleeping bags into the trash. The boys' bikes even smelled bad for many days afterward, as if the metal itself had absorbed the odor. It probably goes without saying that the boys never felt the slightest urge to return to those woods or the clearing. And because they didn't want to risk ridicule and cruel remarks by talking about their experience, their story has never been officially told. That is, until today. Despite the traumatic experience, both boys would recover in the short term, but their longer-term fates diverged. Whether coincidental or as an effect of the encounter, both boys would develop epilepsy within a year of the incident. Angelo was apparently never able to process or come to terms with what had happened as well as Joey did. Joey believes this was a major factor in Angelo turning to drug and alcohol abuse as a young adult later in life, dying within 15 years from chronic substance abuse in his early 30s. On the other hand, Joey was able to at least compartmentalize his experience, leading a reasonably successful and settled life, complete with family, career, and decent health. He has, however, recently developed cancer, which he is determined to beat. This latest challenge has nevertheless been a deciding factor in his recent decision to allow his and Angelo's story to be shared after more than 50 years, to make sure that their particularly terrifying otherworldly experience is known and recorded, before even what is remembered of it becomes lost to the river of passing time. If you've enjoyed this episode of Ominous and Grim and want more shocking history and dark mystery, don't forget to follow this podcast, share the episode with your friends, and review us on your favorite platform. Finally, sign up at ominousandgrim.com for members-only benefits. That's OMINOUSANDGRYMM.com. And until next episode, be sure to look behind you.